She was tied to a post in the desert, left for the vultures, her lips cracked, her wrists bleeding. Yet what she whispered when a rancher cut her free froze his blood. "One kiss, before I die." But was it mercy she wanted, or a curse, that would follow him to the grave? The desert burned like a furnace. Heat shimmered on the salt flats until the air itself seemed ready to split. A lone rider moved slow across the waste, hat brim low, dust clinging to his coat. His name was Elias Ward, rancher of Red Mesa, a man more comfortable with cattle than with company. He had come this far chasing strays, but what he found was no beast. There, tied cruelly to a weathered post, was a woman. Her wrists were cut by rawhide, lips split from thirst, dress torn and stiff with dust. Her eyes fluttered as he dismounted, spurs crunching on the brittle ground. He reached for his knife, the silence broken only by a vulture circling above. When the binding snapped, she slumped forward, catching against his chest. Breath shallow, she whispered something that froze him. "One kiss, before I die." Elias stiffened, unsure if it was delirium or truth. Her gaze burned despite the fading light. Then with trembling fingers, she pressed a small blood-marked letter into his hand. He hadn't asked for this. The desert was full of ghosts best, left unburied. Yet the words scrawled across the envelope clawed at him. "To the one who finds me, deliver this, or more blood will follow." Elias swallowed hard. The smart thing was to ride away. But her body, limp in his arms, said time had already run. Out. He lifted her onto his horse, heart pounding against the stillness of the flats. Behind him, wind carried dust devils across the horizon. Were they only storms or riders? Elias swung into the saddle, jaw tight. He pressed his heels to the horse. The desert swallowed their trail, but not his fear. Friend or foe, he muttered to himself. Salvation or a crueler fate. The sun sank red, and somewhere in the distance, a rifle cracked. The ranch at Red Mesa was no palace, just a weather-worn cabin braced against endless wind, and a barn that leaned like an old drunk. Elias pushed through the door. The woman slumped against him, her breath rattling in his ear. He laid her on, the cot by the hearth and lit a lamp, shadows dancing across her bruised face. Her name, she whispered between gulps of water, was Clara. No surname offered, no explanation yet. Her hands trembled as if even memory cut too deep. Elias said nothing. He fetched a rag, dabbed the blood at her wrists, and built a fire strong enough to chase the night chill. Outside, coyotes yipped on the ridge. Inside, the silence thickened. Elias thought of the letter still folded in his pocket. Deliver it, she had begged. But to whom? And why had men left her tied to die? He stared into the fire, questions burning, hotter than the logs, then hoofbeats, distant but steady. He crossed to the window. Lanterns flickered on the hills, too many to be travelers. His gut tightened. He returned to Clara. "You brought company," he said, voice low. Her eyes flashed, wide, panic breaking through exhaustion. She tried to rise, but her body failed her. "They won't stop," she whispered. "Not until—" The rest was lost in a cough. Elias gripped the rifle propped by the door. His cattle weren't worth dying for, but he'd die before handing over a half-dead woman. That was the kind of man he was, stubborn as rock, reckless as storm. Thunder rumbled across the mesa, though the sky was clear. It was only the drumming of hooves closer now. Shadows of riders swept along the ridge like black wings. Elias barred the door. "If you've got truths, now's the time," he told her. Clara clutched his hand, desperate. "Deliver the letter." "Promise me." Her voice cracked, but her eyes held steady. Outside, the riders' voices echoed. Hard men, laughing low. Elias swallowed his curse. By taking her in, he had already made enemies. And they were here. The lamp hissed. The fire popped. Then came the scrape of boots on his porch. Out here in the Wild West, mercy was as dangerous as a loaded gun. Every choice carried a price, and every rider knew tomorrow wasn't promised. If this story has you gripping the reins, don't ride. Past it, Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. More tales of love, dust, and blood await, and the next twist may change everything. Morning came pale and gray over Red Mesa. Elias opened the door to find the riders gone, or hiding where his eyes couldn't reach. He walked the perimeter with his rifle, scanning every ridge. Nothing moved but the dust, yet he knew better than to think danger had passed. Out here, men didn't vanish. They waited. Inside, Clara sat propped against the wall, sipping weak coffee. Her skin still carried the waxen pallor of someone too close to death, but color was creeping back. She watched him with wary gratitude. "You could have left me," she said. "I should have," Elias answered flatly, then glanced at the letter resting on the table, its seal broken, ink smeared by blood. He hadn't opened it. Not yet. Clara's gaze followed his. "Don't," she murmured. "It's not yours to read." Elias shrugged, setting his cup down. He turned to the barn, mending a broken hinge, with iron nails. She watched him through the open door as he moved like a man who'd carried solitude too long, every strike of the hammer steady, stubborn, almost angry. By midday, Clara shuffled outside, fragile but determined. She found him sowing feed, fixing the fence where cattle had pushed through. She bent to help, hands fumbling with wire. He almost told her to stop, but then saw the grit in her jaw. This woman was no porcelain doll. She carried scars deeper than her wrists. "Why are they after you?" he asked. Her hands stilled. Smoke from the chimney curled into the empty sky. "Because I lived," she whispered, "and because someone they want didn't." Elias frowned but pressed no further. The wind carried the sound of a crow's caw, harsh and distant, then a thud against the barn. He raised his rifle. A folded note was pinned to the wood by a knife. "Hand her over. Sundown. Angel's Well." His jaw clenched. So the riders hadn't left. They had set the terms. Clara's face blanched at the words. "They won't stop," she said again, almost pleading. Elias looked toward the mesa rim, dust hazing the horizon. The West had its laws, unwritten and cruel. He spat in the dirt. "Then neither do I." Sundown bled across the desert like fire poured over stone. The air turned sharp, and the mesa's shadow swallowed Red Mesa Ranch whole. Elias saddled his horse, the rifle slung across his back, while Clara gripped the saddle horn, pale but steady. Angel's Well lay 3 miles east, the only water hole for a day's ride in any direction. If men wanted control, that was where they'd set their snare. They rode in silence, dust curling off the hooves. Clara's hand brushed the pocket of his duster where the letter rested. "If they take me, promise you'll ride on," she said. Elias gave her a look that cut sharper than words. "Don't speak like a dying woman." Lantern light winked ahead. First 1, then 5, then a dozen. Riders circled the stone well, torches flickering like a ring of fireflies turned cruel. Elias drew rein, keeping to the cover of mesquite. The smell of kerosene drifted on the wind. "They're waiting for someone to open the gate," Clara whispered. Her voice carried dread, and she was right. The old corral fence that boxed the waterhole stood wide open, as if an unseen hand had welcomed death in. Elias's teeth clenched. Someone close had betrayed him. Someone had opened that gate. He dismounted, pulling Clara down with him, crouching low in the brush. The riders laughed around the well, tossing whiskey between them. One fired a shot into the air, the echo rolling across the desert like thunder. "Time's up, rancher," a voice bellowed. "Bring her out, or we come take her." Clara trembled. Against Elias's arm. He whispered, steady as stone, "They want a show. Let's give 'em dust instead of blood." But before he could move, a lantern flared to their left. More men. Shadows fanned across the ridge. The trap had snapped shut. Clara's breath hitched. Elias cocked the rifle, every muscle coiled. He could feel the desert holding its breath, waiting for the first shot. Somewhere beyond the circle of firelight, a church bell tolled. Once, twice, hollow and mournful. The night riders turned their heads toward the sound, and Elias knew the fight was coming. The churchyard ridge loomed above Angel's Well, black against a bruised sky. Elias led Clara toward the crumbling chapel, its bell still echoing, its roof half fallen in. From up here he could see the riders below, circling, restless, waiting for his mistake. Clara leaned heavy on him, her strength nearly gone. Her eyes searched his face. "Elias," she whispered, "if this is the end, give me that kiss. Let me die knowing I was loved once." His throat tightened. A man like him wasn't built for words, but he bent to her, dust and blood between them, and kissed her lips, gentle, desperate, a vow unspoken. When he pulled back, her tears shone brighter than the stars. A shout rose from below. Lanterns swung, rifles lifted. The night exploded with gunfire. Elias pushed Clara behind the chapel wall and returned fire, sparks leaping from his barrel. The crack of shots echoed across the ridge, each one answered by the angry chorus of the men who hunted them. Dust sprayed, stone chipped, a bullet tore. Through his sleeve. He gritted his teeth, reloaded, fired again. One rider fell from his horse with a scream that vanished into the desert night, but they kept coming. Clara pressed the letter into his hand once more, voice raw. "If you live, deliver it, swear it." Elias met her gaze, then nodded once. Another volley thundered, and he rose to meet it. The church bell swung wildly now, struck by a stray bullet, its toll carrying like a death knell across the mesa. Shadows danced on the ridge, men charging up the slope. Elias emptied his rifle, each shot slowing the tide but never stopping it. Then came silence, his last round spent. Boots pounded closer. He drew his revolver, breath steady, eyes fixed on Clara. "One shot left," he said, "and I'll make it count." The riders crested the ridge. The desert seemed to hold still, even the wind bowing its head. Elias raised the pistol. A kiss still burned on his lips. The trigger pulled. Dust and blood filled the night, and the West, as always, kept its secrets. But if Clara's courage and Elias's vow stirred something in you, don't let this story ride off into the dark. Out here, love is rarer than water, and survival is won by inches. Subscribe for more tales of dust, blood, and devotion, because the next story may cut even deeper.